Imagine being a solitary farmer in 1887 Montana, having buried your wife and two children during a brutal winter, drowning your sorrows in whiskey every night on your porch. Then one evening, you hear a small voice whispering your name from the shadows, a voice that belongs to an 8-year-old girl who had been secretly living on your property for 2 weeks after escaping a brutal outlaw attack that killed her entire family. If you want to know how this broken farmer and orphaned child found healing together and created a new family from their shared grief in the harsh American frontier, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because this story of loss, survival, and unexpected hope will touch your heart in ways you never expected. The Montana wind cut through Thomas Hartwell's worn coat as he sat on the weathered porch of his farmhouse, a half-empty bottle of whiskey resting on the wooden railing beside him. 6 months had passed since he buried his wife Margaret and their 2 children, little Samuel and baby Mary, in the small cemetery behind the barn. The typhoid fever had taken them during the brutal winter of 1887, leaving Thomas alone on the 160-acre homestead that had once been filled with laughter and purpose. Now, in the fading light of an August evening, Thomas stared across the fields that had grown wild with neglect. He kept only a handful of chickens for eggs and maintained a small vegetable garden, just enough to survive. The cattle had been sold months ago to pay for medicine that came too late, and the larger fields lay fallow, overtaken by prairie grass and weeds. Thomas lifted the bottle to his lips, the familiar burn of whiskey temporarily dulling the constant ache in his chest. He had taken to spending his evenings on this porch, talking to the empty air as if Margaret might still be listening. "Should have planted the south field this spring, Maggie," he murmured to the gathering darkness. "You always said that field had the best soil." His voice cracked slightly. "Course, what's the point now? Just me here, and I ain't gonna live forever." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree beside the house, and for a moment, Thomas thought he heard something else, a soft sound, almost like breathing. He paused, holding the bottle halfway to his mouth, and listened intently. Only the usual sounds of evening: crickets chirping, a barn owl calling in the distance, and the soft lowing of his neighbor's cattle half a mile away. "Getting old, Thomas," he muttered to himself, taking another drink. "Hearing things that ain't there." But as the darkness deepened and the first stars appeared overhead, Thomas heard it again, definitely not the wind this time. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakably a voice. Thomas. The whisper came from the shadows at the far end of the porch, near the old rocking chair where Margaret used to sit while mending clothes. Thomas felt his blood run cold. He set down the bottle with a trembling hand and peered into the darkness. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice hoarse from the whiskey and months of disuse. "Show yourself." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pounding of Thomas's heart. He had heard stories of men who went mad from grief, who saw and heard their dead loved ones calling to them from beyond. Was this how it started? Thomas. The whisper came again, and this time he was certain it wasn't Margaret's voice. It was higher, younger, a child's voice. Thomas stood up slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the old Colt revolver he always kept tucked in his belt. Indians were mostly peaceful in this area now, but there were still outlaws and drifters who might target an isolated farmhouse. "I'm armed," he warned, stepping toward the shadows. "If you're looking for trouble, you've come to the wrong place." A small figure stirred in the darkness near the rocking chair, and Thomas caught a glimpse of pale fabric, a dress or nightgown. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out the shape of a child, small and thin, pressed back against the wall of the house. "Please don't hurt me," came the whispered voice, clearly that of a young girl. I didn't mean to bother you." Thomas felt his anger drain away, replaced by confusion and concern. A child, alone out here in the middle of nowhere? What in God's name? Little girl, what are you doing out here? The child remained pressed against the wall, and Thomas could see her trembling. I've been watching you, she admitted in a voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. You talk to yourself sometimes when you're working in the garden. That's how I learned your name. Watching me? Thomas lowered his gun, but kept it in his hand. How long have you been out here? 2 weeks, maybe more. I lost count. The girl's voice was weak, exhausted. I was hiding in your barn mostly, and sometimes under your porch when it rained. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. A child had been living on his property for 2 weeks without him knowing? Where are your parents? Your family? The silence that followed was answer enough. Thomas had seen enough death and loss in his 41 years to recognize the particular quality of grief in someone else's voice. Come into the light, he said gently, holstering his weapon. Let me see you proper. Slowly, cautiously, a small girl emerged from the shadows. She appeared to be about 8 years old, with tangled brown hair and a dirt-stained dress that had once been blue. Her face was gaunt from hunger, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much death for such a young age. What's your name, child? Emma, she whispered. Emma Patterson. Thomas had never heard the name before, which meant she wasn't from any of the nearby homesteads. Emma Patterson, he repeated softly. Well, Emma, seems to me you've got quite a story to tell. Thomas brought Emma into the kitchen, lighting an oil lamp that cast warm shadows on the walls. The house felt strange with another person in it, the first time in months that footsteps other than his own had crossed these floors. Emma sat nervously on the edge of a wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, eyes darting around the room as if memorizing escape routes. When's the last time you ate a proper meal? Thomas asked, studying her thin frame and hollow cheeks. I don't remember, Emma admitted. I've been eating eggs from your chickens when I could catch them, and there's berries growing wild behind your barn. Thomas felt a pang of guilt. While he'd been drowning in whiskey and self-pity, a child had been starving just yards from his door. Well, that ain't right. Let me fix you something proper. He moved around the kitchen with unfamiliar motions. Had been months since he'd cooked anything more elaborate than coffee, and whatever simple food would keep him alive. But muscle memory from years of helping Margaret with meals slowly returned. He found some salt pork, beans, and hardtack, and began preparing a simple but nourishing stew. You said you've been watching me for 2 weeks, Thomas said as he worked. Where did you come from before that? Emma's small hands twisted in her lap. We were traveling from Kansas to Oregon Territory. Ma and Pa wanted to start fresh out there, maybe find gold or good farmland. Her voice grew quieter. We joined, up with 3 other families in a wagon train, but we got separated from the main group during a river crossing. Thomas continued stirring the pot, giving Emma time to tell her story at her own pace. He had heard enough tales of westward migration, gone wrong to know where this was likely heading. 5 days later, we were camped by a creek about 20 miles south of here, Emma continued. Pa had shot a deer, and we were all feeling good about having fresh meat. Then the bad men came. Bad men? Outlaws, I think. 4 of them, with guns and mean faces. They wanted our supplies, our horses, everything. Emma's voice began to shake. Pa tried to fight them off, but Thomas set down his spoon and turned to face her. You don't have to tell me everything right now, child. Some stories are too hard to tell all at once. Emma nodded gratefully, wiping her eyes with her dirty sleeve. They killed everyone. May, Pay, my baby brother Johnny, and all the other families too. I only lived because I was in Thewoods gathering firewood when they came. I heard the shooting and hid behind some rocks. Jesus, Thomas breathed, feeling. his own grief mixed with anger at the senseless violence this child had witnessed. After the bad men left, I came back to camp, but Emma's voice broke completely. There was nothing I could do. I buried Johnny myself, but the ground was too hard for the others. I'm sorry. I know that's not proper, but I was scared more bad men might come back. Thomas knelt down beside her chair, his weathered hands gentle on her small shoulders. You did fine, Emma. You did everything you could. I walked for days, following the creek north like Pay had taught me. Then I found your farm. I was so hungry and tired, but I was scared you might be a bad man too, so I hid in your barn and watched you for a long time. And you decided I wasn't a bad man? Emma managed a small smile. You talk to someone named Maggie when you're working. You're always gentle with your chickens, and I saw you fix a bird's wing once when it got hurt. Bad men don't do things like that. Thomas felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't quite hope, but it was something warmer than the cold despair that had consumed him since Margaret's death. Maggie was my wife, he explained quietly. She died this past winter, along with our children. That's why I talk to her sometimes. Helps me feel less alone. Emma nodded with the solemn understanding that only comes from personal experience with loss. I talk to Ma and Johnny sometimes, too. The stew was ready, and Thomas ladled a generous portion into a bowl for Emma. She ate carefully but hungrily, and he could see some color returning to her pale cheeks with each spoonful. Emma, Thomas said after she had finished eating, you can't keep living in my barn. It ain't safe, and winter's coming in a few months. We need to figure out what to do with you. Fear flashed in her eyes. Are you going to send me away? I don't know, Thomas answered honestly. I've been barely managing to take care of myself, let alone a child. But I won't turn you out with nowhere to go. I promise you that. Emma looked around the kitchen, taking in the cold stove, the dusty shelves, and the general air of neglect that hung over everything. Maybe I could help, she said quietly. I know how to cook some things, and I can clean and mend clothes. Ma taught me. Thomas studied her earnest face, seeing a maturity far beyond her 8 years. This child had survived horrors that would have broken many adults, and she was offering to help him, despite having every reason to fear grown men. Let's start with tonight, he decided. You can sleep in my children's room. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. As Thomas led Emma up the narrow stairs to the small bedroom that had belonged to Samuel and Mary, he felt the first stirring of something he thought he'd lost forever, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The next morning, Thomas woke, too. Sounds he hadn't heard in months, the gentle clatter of dishes, the soft splash of water being poured, and quiet humming drifting up from the kitchen. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, he thought Margaret had returned. Then reality settled back around him, and he remembered the small orphan girl now sleeping in his children's room. When he made his way downstairs, he found Emma standing on a wooden crate in front of the stove, carefully tending to a pan of eggs and salt pork. She had managed to wash her face and hands, and had braided her tangled hair into a neat plate. The kitchen, which had been cluttered with dirty dishes and neglect, was noticeably cleaner. Morning, Thomas said, his voice still rough with sleep. Emma turned with a shy smile. I hope you don't mind. I found the eggs and thought you might be hungry. I cleaned up a little too. Thomas looked around the kitchen with new eyes. The dishes were washed and stacked neatly. The floor had been swept, and someone had even wiped down the dusty surfaces. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, Emma replied, carefully flipping the eggs. Ma always said idle hands make for troubled thoughts. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, and Thomas found himself studying this remarkable child who had survived so much and still thought to care for others. After the meal, Emma began washing the dishes without being asked, and Thomas made a decision. "Emma, would you like to see the rest of the farm?" Her face lit up with genuine interest. "Yes, please." Thomas led her outside into the crisp morning air. He showed her the vegetable garden, explaining which plants were ready for harvest and which needed more time. Emma listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering to help with the work. "My pa taught me about growing things," she sighed, kneeling to examine a tomato plant. "He said the secret was talking to them like they were friends." "Your pa was a smart man," Thomas replied, feeling an unexpected warmth at hearing someone else speak of growing things with love and knowledge. They spent the morning working together in the garden. Emma proved to be a capable helper, her small hands gentle with the plants and her energy infectious. For the first time in months, Thomas found himself actually enjoying the work instead of simply enduring it. As they picked vegetables for lunch, Emma asked quietly, "What were your children like?" Thomas paused, his hand stilling on a particularly large tomato. He had avoided thinking about Samuel and Mary in any specific way, finding it too painful. But something about Emma's genuine curiosity made the memories feel less sharp, more bearable. "Samuel was 6, he said slowly, curious about everything, always asking questions. He wanted to know how plants grew, why the sky was blue, where the stars went during the day." Thomas smiled slightly, drove Margaret near to distraction. Sometimes with all his wondering. Emma nodded encouragingly, and Thomas found himself continuing. "Mary was just learning to walk when when they died. She had this laugh that could make you smile even on your worst day. And she loved music. Margaret would sing to her, and Mary would clap her little hands and try to sing along." "They sound wonderful," Emma said softly. "They were." Thomas straightened up, surprised to find that talking about them hadn't brought the usual crushing wave of grief. "What about your brother, Johnny?" "He was 4, Emma replied, her voice warm with memory. "He was always getting into mischief, but he had the sweetest nature. He used to catch fireflies in a jar just to watch them light up, then let them go because he said they looked sad in there." They continued working, sharing memories of their lost families. Thomas began to understand that Emma's presence wasn't diminishing his love for Samuel and Mary. Instead, her own experience with loss somehow made his grief feel less isolating. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Emma proved remarkably capable for her age, helping with cooking, cleaning, and farm work. More importantly, her presence forced Thomas to establish regular meal times, to maintain the house properly, and to think about someone other than himself. "Thomas," Emma said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, "what's going to happen to me when winter comes?" Thomas had been dreading this conversation, but he knew it couldn't be avoided forever. "I've been thinking about that. There's a mission school in Billings that takes in orphan children. They'd make sure you got an education, teach you proper ladies' skills." Emma's face fell. "You want to send me away." "It ain't about what I want," Thomas said gently. "It's about what's best for you. I'm just a broken-down farmer who's been living more like a hermit than a man. You deserve better than that." "But what if I don't want better?" Emma asked, her voice small but determined. "What if I want to stay here with you?" Thomas felt his chest tighten. "Emma, I'm not your pa. I can't replace what you lost." "And I'm not Samuel or Mary," Emma replied with surprising directness. "But maybe we don't have to replace them. Maybe we can just help each other feel less alone." That night, as Thomas lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of Emma sleeping in the next room, he realized she was right. She couldn't replace his children, and he couldn't replace her parents. But perhaps they could build something new together, not a replacement for what they'd lost, but a different kind of family born from mutual care and understanding. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in brilliant golds and reds, Thomas made his decision. He rode into the town of Cedar Creek to speak with Judge Morrison, a fair man who handled legal matters for the surrounding homesteads. "You want to adopt her?" Judge Morrison asked, leaning back in his chair behind the scarred wooden desk. "I do," Thomas replied firmly. "She's got no other family, and I can provide for her. More than that, she's brought life back to my farm, back to me." Judge Morrison studied Thomas carefully. "Tom, I've known you for near on 10 years. When Margaret and the children died, we all watched you disappear into that grief. Some folks thought you might not pull through it. I might not have, if Emma hadn't come along. And that's exactly my concern," the judge said gently. "I need to know you're adopting this child for her sake, not just because she's helping you deal with your loss." Thomas had expected this question and had spent many sleepless nights examining his own motives. "Judge, I won't lie and say it started purely from wanting to help her. She did help pull me out of a dark place. But these past 2 months, watching her grow stronger, seeing her smile come back, teaching her things, it's not about my grief anymore. It's about her future. What does she want? She wants to stay? She's made that clear?" Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll need to interview her myself, make sure she understands what adoption means, and that she's not just afraid of being sent to an orphanage." The interview took place the following week. Emma, dressed in a new blue dress that Thomas had purchased in town, sat straight-backed in the judge's office and answered his questions with remarkable poise. "Emma, do you understand that if Mr. Hartwell adopts you, he becomes your legal father? That you would take his name and be his daughter in the eyes of the law?" "Yes, sir," Emma replied clearly. "And you're certain this is what you want? You're not just afraid of other alternatives?" Emma considered this carefully before answering. "Judge Morrison, Thomas has been kinder to me than anyone since my real parents died. He's teaching me to read better, and he listens when I talk about Ma and Pa without getting uncomfortable. He doesn't try to make me forget them, but he helps me remember the good parts instead of just the sad parts." "What about when you're grown up? What do you expect from this arrangement?" "I expect to help him run the farm until I'm old enough to make my own decisions about my life. I expect to take care of him when he gets old, the way children should. And I expect to always be grateful that he chose to love me, even though I'm not his blood." Judge Morrison looked between Thomas and Emma, seeing the genuine affection and respect that had grown between them. "Very well. I'll draw up the adoption papers." The ceremony was simple, just Thomas, Emma, Judge Morrison, and 2 witnesses from town. But as Thomas signed his name on the documents that made Emma legally his daughter, he felt a profound sense of completion that he hadn't expected. That evening, they celebrated with a special supper that Emma had spent all day preparing. As they sat on the porch afterward, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, Emma leaned against Thomas's shoulder. "Pa," she said quietly, testing out the word. "Yes, daughter?" Thomas replied, the word feeling natural and right on his tongue. "Do you think Ma and Margaret and the others would be happy about this? About us becoming a family?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "I think they'd want us to be happy and to take care of each other. And I think they'd be proud of how strong and kind you've become." Emma smiled and settled more comfortably against his side. "I think so, too." As winter approached, Thomas worked with renewed energy to prepare the farm. He and Emma spent long evenings planning improvements for the spring, which fields to plant, what crops might do well, how to expand the vegetable garden. Emma proved to have inherited her father's understanding of the land, offering insights that impressed Thomas with their practical wisdom. The first snow came in November, transforming the farm into a pristine white landscape. Thomas watched Emma's delight at the beauty of it, and realized that grief hadn't disappeared from his life. It had simply found its proper place alongside new love, new purpose, and new hope. One evening, as they sat by the fire reading together, Emma looked up from her book and said, "Pa, next spring, can we plant flowers on the graves?" "I think they'd like that." "I think that's a fine idea," Thomas replied, understanding that Emma was talking about all their lost loved ones, his family and hers, now remembered together with equal love. Outside, the Montana wind howled across the prairie, but inside the farmhouse, two people who had found each other in the depths of loss sat warm and safe, planning a future that honored their past while embracing the possibility of joy. Had both learned that family isn't always about blood sometimes. It's about two wounded souls choosing to heal together, creating something new and beautiful from the ashes of what they'd lost.